Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you to our Wednesday talk, Modern Applications, Modern Teams, Resilient by Design, Unified in Delivery. And I'm very excited to introduce you to two exceptional technologists and team builders. Nick Clarkson is a principal consultant based in our Dallas office, and Roberto Garcia is a technical software lead from our Guadalajara office. So Nick and Roberto are not only highly skilled in modern software architecture, they're also architects of culture. Their success stems from their ability to cultivate cohesive, informed, and accountable teams that thrive on trust and shared purpose. So in this session, they'll share how their cross-regional teams design and delivered a modern digital platform from the ground up, uniting .NET, microservices, Vue.js front ends, and Azure Kubernetes into a modular, observable, and responsive solution. But the story is much more than just technology. It's about how nearshore engineers were empowered to engage directly with stakeholders, how ownership was distributed across borders, and how a culture of high trust collaboration led to sustained delivery momentum and strong team retention. So get ready to explore not just what they built, but how they built it together. And Nick and Roberto, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Lynn, for that great introduction. Roberto, would you like to give us a little more detail about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Tim. Good morning. Well, my name is Roberto Garcia. I'm a software consultant. I have been working with Nick on the same project around 4 years ago. So a long period of time. So during this time, we have a many lesson learned. It is a long time that we need to share with you all the process that we are involved in the project. So about me, I'm a soccer fan. I love the cooking seafood. My specialty on the seafood is the ceviche, for example. I like to go to the gym to stay active, and I originally from Mazatlan, a beautiful tourist place here in Mexico. Right now, I'm working on Guadalajara's office, but I'm originally from the coastal. Yeah. What about you, Nick?
All right. Yeah, thank you, Roberto. It sounds like we should all come to your house for lunch after this if you're making ceviche. So
Oh, yeah.
I'll have to. I'm going to be hungry by then. But yeah, no. Yeah. So a little bit about me. I've got a wonderful wife at home that does her best to keep me in line. I like to anyone that's been around me a little bit knows I love to tell a good story. I do love to play board games as well. If you're in the Dallas office and you're hearing this, we are playing board games this Friday night. So if you're hearing this live, please come and join us for board games. I'm sorry there probably won't be any Roberto's Great Ceviche, but we'll play some games and have some fun. I also often joke that I'm a hobbyist of hobbies because I do love a good new hobby to try out. So a little bit on the roles towards this particular project we're going to be talking about today. I kind of started out when we early on in the project more of an architecture role, and then helping with recruiting and building out our teams that we ultimately ended up with several teams that we built out on the project, and then have done some team lead along the way, and then more recently transitioned into a need for the client where it's playing more of a sort of an app dev director role for our teams there or the majority of our teams there at Improving. So Roberto, I know you've worn many hats as well on this project. So can you tell us a little bit about your project roles before we get too far into the project itself?
For sure, we have many, as Nick mentioned, many roles here. So one of the roles are the front-end developer, back-end, and also we need to send a couple of things around the continuous delivery things. So yeah, but basically here I'm the technical leader in the project. So this is a good transition because we need to understand a couple of things, not only the business requirements, so we need to understand all the roles in the application to collaborate with this main basis on each area. Yeah, it is really amazing.
Yeah, and speaking of the teams and applications, what do we mean by modern? We throw that word around, but what do we mean there?
Oh yeah, we can divide this context in two different parts. One is modern application that involve a cloud native solution that 24 and 7 hours availability all the time. We need to availability this application. Another thing is continuous integration and continuous delivery. This is an interesting topic because we are working on an application with many developers. So maybe you can imagine all the challenges that we have related to the continuous integration. For example, in the PRs, in the code bases, we have a couple of challenge related that with a big project, but we need to distribute this project with a single solutions to prevent a lot of efforts on that area. Also, the continuous delivery related to the all the effort related to the configuration. It is a hard thing in one big application. So another part here is the security patterns in the application with an external providers that we need to implement. It is one challenge because honestly, for me, is the first time that I look this implementation with a external service provider, but it is a really cool thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, and on
yeah,
a little more on the application side there, to what you touched on about not just enabling, more teams and more people to work in there, but also that goes right to things we expect out of modern platforms and applications around, those abilities. And you mentioned security a little bit, and that kind of falls into that when it gets its own special treatment, but also all of those scalability, observability concerns and maybe we've got new markets we want to chase, new features we want to add. And so we have to have that agility and flexibility in there as well, right? And so that's a lot of what we, I think about when we talk about the modern applications as well.
yeah, for sure. And also in the other topic is the modern teams. That is, the first one is hybrid. And what is that? If we need to implement something, the cool thing here is we can move between areas. So this is a really cool thing because if we move between areas, we can understand all the process between the application and the business requirements. So this is a really cool thing. Around the cross-functional, this is a really cool thing also because we need to at certain period of time we need to also move and explore all the caves on the application, all the small parts on the application. We need to take all of this in the context to understand what is the process behind the scenes of the application. Geographically distributed is one of my favorite parts because we interact with the people from different time zones. So you could say something in the app, but maybe the tester is not in your same time zone location. Yeah, it is a really funny part. And also the async collaboration is a curious thing because the culture it is plays here an important role. For example, in United States, the lunch time is around 12 p.m., but here in Mexico it's around 2 or 3 p.m. That this could impact the times to response. So, for example, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think, some of the things that you're speaking to there that, that you and I've discussed before is we look at modern applications and how we build those, and maybe those are things people are familiar with, and they're thinking about the new tech and the way we do cloud native and things like that. But oftentimes we don't necessarily think about how we build teams and evolving that as well too, because we've seen a lot of change in our industry and even at improving as we've grown with how we build teams and how they're put together. And as you'll see as we discuss further in this talk, it's about really putting that intentional effort into how you design your teams. And some of those lessons were hard won, as we went and maybe stubbed our toe on some things and figured out the right, better ways of doing these things, but being remote's okay, right? it's fantastic. Being geographically distributed is great because guess what? We can go out and find the talent that we need, not settle for the talent that's available in a smaller bubble, right? We can go out and put the team together that we need and not have to necessarily worry that. Well, that comes with some challenges though. There's some things we have to do, like sometimes embrace async collaboration. We have to be more aware of cultures and, not just time zones, but cultures other than our own. Like you mentioned, the lunchtime, right?
Yeah.
Everybody's very flexible. We're always willing. Sometimes I take a meeting during lunch. Sometimes you take a meeting during La Comida, right? Sometimes it happens, but being aware of that and being flexible and remembering the human part of it is really what, I think it takes to build a modern team that has what we need to be successful. So to frame some of this a little bit as we start to get into detail, I'll give you a little bit of improving history. Now, I'm not going to go all the way back because you'd be bored to tears, even though I would love to tell you the last 17 years that I know of improving history.
Mhm.
That's probably not what we're here for. But I will go back a little bit to early 2020. It happened to all of us. You're here listening to this, so you know exactly what I'm talking about. We were figuring out, we were already adapting, especially in the Dallas office. We had a lot of remote work going on. That was not something we had done out of the Dallas office a lot. Occasionally, we might have a team that worked from the improving office, but that was more of a rare thing. Most of our business had been face to face, sitting down with the client, usually at the client side, working along with them. And, it was more rare that we had any sort of remote team or remote team members or anything like that. But the work in 2020 started going remote, right?
Yeah.
And then we started to find out that, oh, well, people are open to remote, and maybe we're filling up a team and said, oh, well, since we're already working remote anyways, we have someone available from maybe a Columbus office or maybe a Canadian office. Can we pull them into the team? Well, we're all working remote anyway. Sure, why not? Well, so we started seeing that people were more open to that, and our client base was now more open to that remote work. And then about mid 2020 or so, we were very fortunate and improving to be able to make an acquisition of a company called Itexco, who is primarily staffed out of Mexico, out of Guadalajara and Aguascalientes. And so, overnight in the summer, we were able to, up our headcount of improvers by several hundred people. And that opened up some new opportunities for us as well, because not only did we have some great talent that could work remotely now, and we had the ability to bring them onto projects remotely, we were able to do so during a time where maybe people were a little more reserved on the spending side because it was 2020 and they weren't sure what was going to happen. And we were able to do some interesting blended rates and some better price points by bringing on this new enterprise. And so that's when December of 2020 comes along, and that's when the client for the project we're going to be discussing today, and where we built these teams, had reached out to us to start to engage us. And so then in the new year in 2021, we started to talk about what that would look like. They were very interested in building a remote set of teams. They were very interested in our nearshore model with our group out of Mexico. So we started to look at how we could start putting that together. But first, we needed to know some about the project, and I'll let Roberto tell us about some of the project goals that we got from the client and the things that were important to them that we'll want to keep in mind as we discuss what we built and how we built it.
Yeah. Around the overall idea from the client is build a new platform that is a good challenge to us because it is a big platform. We need to understand of all the process and create a good comfort around the daily work day by day. So yeah, it must be secure. Secure is necessary today's days. And yeah, also the creating the CD processes. It is a cool thing because this helps a lot with the continuous delivery of the application. This is a really cool thing. What else? The flexible. Well, we need to use the latest standards to maintain the long-term application and not do a obsolete application, for example. We need to make the old standards and the more recent things on the industry. Another thing is the cross collaboration with an internal team to enhance and streamline the software process. Yeah, this is a really cool thing because it is not only us, US and Mexico team. We have an internal team from the client, and this is a really, really cool thing. related to the cross collaboration with this internal team to increase the level inside the team. And yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, this was really, when we heard about this, this was a really, interesting project. A lot of times in our consulting, clients come to us and sometimes come to us in a, either in a bad or an emergency state. This was a little different, right? So this was an organization who had been successful. With what they already had, but they were self-aware enough to know that what got them there wouldn't necessarily get them to the next step, and they knew that they wanted to build, their next gen platform, and they knew that they would need more people than they had, and they knew that they would need some more, knowledge and skill that they currently had, and they'd want to build that up internally as they went. And so while we always have to work to, build those strong trust relationships with our clients, it's a little different when they're coming with, they're in growth mode, and they're looking to find the right partner and wanting to engage in that way. And so, that was very, it was a pretty tall order. And so we stepped in with a bit of the architecture first and looked at what they had and where they were trying to go to, overall from the needs that we heard and we saw from the project goals and other things as we worked through product. Also, once we started, not, the entire product as it was going to become wasn't, completely defined just yet, right? We had an idea, but there were more specifics to come. So we wanted to make sure that we built things in a way that it could adjust as we built. So at the foundation of it, we knew, since they were already a .NET shop, that we would start with .NET. The way the problem broke down, it seemed to lend itself towards a microservices architecture approach. We pulled along into MassTransit to help us with that, service communication or event bus messaging layer. MassTransit's a .NET library that plays nice over all of your .NET applications. And by default, it goes out to do its messaging through RabbitMQ, and it abstracts all the way all those things that you don't want to necessarily have to deal with at a low level queuing messaging level. Your developers can get in there and just think about how these applications are going to, what events and commands and things that they need to do to communicate and get their job done, and not necessarily having to understand the details of the transport system. We did know that we wanted this to be, easily, deployable and manageable from a DevOps perspective. So we knew we were going to be deploying these services into containers, specifically Kubernetes. Now, early in the project, there was a initial decision that was going to be on-prem, but ultimately that ended up going to Azure to be Azure Kubernetes service, and to have all those services running there in the Azure cloud. And then it doesn't matter how well you've built your software. It doesn't matter how great it runs. If you don't know what it's doing at any given point in time, and you can't tell if problems are happening, then you might as well not have built it. So you always need that observability, that monitoring capability. We did start initially with Elastic and APM, just through some vendor selection and differences there. Ended up with Datadog as the product. So all of the APM, all of the logging goes to Datadog, where we're able to do monitoring, observability, build some nice dashboards out there, be able to tell what's going on with that system. And all of this being able to, again, meet those project goals, right? We can bring in subsystems of various number of microservices to satisfy different feature sets. Or even, one of the things that I know that had challenges with in the past was, if they needed to, change functionality over time. Now you have to spin up entire machines or entire VMs to support the new version while you spin the old version down. Well, if we're in containers and we have these small services, we can very easily run things side by side, scale out as needed, scale down as needed, all those wonderful things that type of architecture will be able to give you. So that's kind of the high level of the platform of their back end that we were helping them design, and some of our improvers were helping them to build. The majority of the teams and the work that Roberto and I have worked with, though, have been more on the application side of the user-facing applications. So, Roberto, can you tell us a little bit about some of the architecture and techniques and things that we used for those, front-end applications?
Yeah, sure. Well, this is my favorite part because, as you mentioned, this is application architecture that this is a really fun for me. For example, at the top left on the screen, we have a backend for frontends methodology that we have a couple of service that provide a different information. We have one something like middleware that provides the final information that we need to use at the final application that is the front end. So yeah, we built these interactions with .NET, API service, and Vue with front end. So
Yeah,
yeah,
and I think that's important to point out if there are people out there listening who maybe heard about this or maybe you've not heard on this pattern. So if you've got an input form, you've got data on the screen, that contract is shaped just like what you see effectively. It might have some additional data that you don't see, some Ds or something like that that you need, but shape that way so that you can with it if he's serving that up to the front end browser and it's not going to be floating around there out in the user context unless we specifically went and said this is something that goes to the front end. So there's a number of advantages there. I would suggest anyone who's building these types of applications, I highly recommend looking into that if it's not something you've done before. It also helps with a little bit of anti-corruption layer there as well. When we run into a lot of applications where people might have a service with a giant post object and they don't use half of that stuff on the screen, but they post it back anyways from the browser, and now something's got wrong. But yeah, that's just some additional detail on back end.
yeah, sure. Another really cool thing is the component library. That is a magic library with a small part of the each application that we develop. So this is a really cool thing because only we need to develop one time and this effort apply for all the application. We this is a very hard effort because we need to create an standards for each applications about the components, colors, and all the design is here. So the cross collaboration with the UX team is very important in this specific part. So we are using the atomic design, for example, to create atoms, molecules, organisms, templates, and page. Finally, the page to the final user. But yeah, this is a big effort because this component library needs to manage a couple of things that we are on a specific implementation. Like this is not a library, a public library. It's an internal library, so we need to manage a different things. But yeah, it is super important. Yeah, related to the micro frontend, this is a really cool thing because this is a big application so to prevent a couple of issues related to the continuous integration, we need to ensure or prevent the issues on that area. So the microfrontends solve that issues related to create a different repositories for each different section of the application. And also we can create a different microfrontend application with a different frameworks, for example, React, Angular, Vue. Right now, it is not the case. All of these are only on Vue, but yeah, it is possible. It is manageable, and it is a really cool thing because this is one of the most recent. I don't know if this is architecture, but it is a concept inside the front end side. So
Yeah,
yeah, and it works
absolutely. And
pretty
so
well. Yeah.
yeah, it was one of the things that we looked into pretty early on, and one of the original reasons for that in this case a big driver was we didn't know necessarily what the entire application looked at the time, but we knew there was already some work doing on the platform, and we needed some verticals from the front end application to be able to configure and manage that platform. And so we knew we had those vertical slices that we could build, but what do you do with those? And so we were able to stand those up on their own. Developers could use and test that all by itself. And then as we started to, it started to gel a little more about what that overall experience looked like, we were able to plug these in. Now, for those of you who might be familiar with micro front ends, you're thinking, well, oh, there's a lot of overhead there. If you go true all the way full micro front end, there is a little more overhead. Now, we only took it as far as we've needed to so far. And what do I mean by that? Well, so if you go all the way micro front end, you would be composing a live page of live micro front ends from different containers and putting that all together in one view. We didn't necessarily need that next level of flexibility. We needed the ability to have a lot of teams working in a lot of verticals and to be able to compose these verticals together as we figured out how they went together. And so the in between version of that was, instead of having to worry about some additional concerns that come with hosting all of these things in different containers, like, how do I make sure I'm not downloading all the common libraries and things that are shared across these multiple times, and getting that bundle on the fly and all this thing that's going to come with that. We chose instead to have these verticals as npm packages, and so that main shell application just pulls in a package for each vertical and starts those up, so that when you run that main application, it just loads up each one of your front ends, which has, in the case of that application, has its own backend for front end API that's dedicated to it, that knows how to support it, that knows how to give it the data that the user needs to interact with. So, we made a few decisions there. I wanted to point that out because that's that kind of, you don't necessarily have to take the whole pattern all the way. You kind of take it and do what's good enough for what you have in front of you. And maybe there's a future where some of those views need to not be npm packages; they need to move out to their own container. We have the flexibility that we could do that if we needed to do that. But yeah, pointing that out. Did we have anything else to add here for application architecture, Roberto?
No, as you mentioned, we are using the NPM packages. Exists and in the industry exists another methodologies. It is a different concept, but at the end, the micro frontends, it is just a single big application, but distributed in some different sections. But yeah.
The little bit on building the team. So we knew that at least starting out, we had a couple of people from the Dallas office that were engaged early on in the project, but we knew that we needed to build. We were going to need to build at least two teams for the front end applications, and possibly a third. And we did end up with three primary teams, and we've since added some other, another team that I haven't been as involved with, but we ended up with three primary teams for those applications. We knew that the backend platform, as we kind of mentioned already, was going to be primarily client personnel, client employees. We'd have some people working with them, doing a lot of, we build learning into this experience, right? So especially early on, we had a lot of lunch and learns, a lot of sessions with architecture, a lot of Q&A, regular meetings, that sort of thing, just to make sure that everybody knew we were getting the team onboarded in a way that it was hopefully going to set up everyone for success. So when we started, we knew that we were going to engage nearshore heavily, because we were, since we were going to build a number of people, pretty sizable teams. So we've ended up with between 15 and 20 nearshore personnel, I believe, at different times. I think we're 15 or so right now, 13, I believe, with the group that Roberto and I worked with. And so we did start to pull from a combination. We had, of course, people who were already part of the organization. They were part of iTextCo when we acquired it. So we had people that were available. We still pulled in. We also started going out and interviewing, finding great people like Roberto here. He was pretty early on. I think you were the first or second person I pulled into the project. I talked to him on the phone for a while, and he blew me away, and haven't had a regret since. So yeah, we set this up, and kind of built out the team in that fashion. But we were looking again, since we did open this up to more than just the local talent pool. Well, we were able to hit a pretty broad number of people, and find the people who really had the skill set that we needed. So one of the things that we did find was, while not necessarily a lot of people had experience in the industry, we were finding with a lot of deep Vue knowledge. What we were finding was a lot of great technologists that had a lot of deep React or Angular. A lot of that was transferable and easy for them to spin up. So we found, we went and looked for people that we knew, if likely they may not have the exact skill set we needed, at least for the front end. We knew we could find people who had already proven themselves out. We knew they would be able to pick that up in short order, and that's kind of how we progressed through building out the team. So we built that team pretty quickly. I mean, it did take a while, but we built up the first team, second team, ultimately a third team over time. We had a lot of great technologists, right? So this is not a new
Yeah.
thing for me at improving, right? It's a kind of an expectation. Oh, I'm working with another improver. They're going to be great. And that was the case. But we did find that reality started to set in, because one thing I know I wasn't used to was, again, I mentioned earlier in the hour, I had never really engaged remotely very heavily, even worked remotely myself, much less work remotely with a team who's not anywhere close to me. And so, we did find that on the technology side, hey, we're solid. We know how to make things happen. But on the team side, we did run into some challenges along the way. And I know, Roberto, did you want to add a little more context there about maybe some of the things we ran into?
Yeah, this is a really important thing because the communication on that time is not going good. So the communication inside the team and also outside the team, it is really important to maintain as a short conversation with a clear information and everything else. That yeah, it is an important thing to make the goals happen successfully. Also, the another thing is the administration inside the project is not going good. So, for example, we need to apply the Scrum methodology, for example, to create a short period of times to deliver the product, for example, and also tracking the individual efforts instead of teams wins. This is a really cool thing because this effort is appreciated by the team because if you working very well, so all the team is happy with that. The delivery is very good with the times that we need to deliver, and yeah, this is really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, so some of the things there that you mentioned, and we can probably dig into just a little more. We did have some constraints for a little while on partly on the project side with, they were also building out their project management group as well. And so we probably didn't have as many people to go around as we needed there. So while we built out separate teams, we ended up with meetings and ceremony where we had one big team. And we had to get through things quickly, and people, and it was being looked at, like you mentioned, as kind of individual efforts and people being assigned specific tasks, and is that task done, and things like that. And we know that if you've been around teams for a while and you built some teams out, we know that that's not something that's going to go go real well. So looking at that, and at this time I was primarily in an architectural role, but was seeing some of this stuff, seeing some of the rough edges we had, and feeling some of that the friction of, especially from working on designs and then implementations happening and maybe things not lining up the way they should. And we knew, hey, something's going on here. And to your point on the individuals things, is we weren't necessarily always seeing ourselves and being seen as a team. Right. And we succeed or fail as a team. And that's really how we should be thinking and operating. Right. And so we had some of those challenges. They weren't necessarily new challenges, but they were different, right? Because we were a distributed team. We were distributed across, like we said, geographically. It's not just time, it's also culture. It's just, we also had, at the time, the client was already moving back into primarily an office. So that hurt communication as well, because a lot of people are back to communicating face to face. And we have this whole huge group of people who are missing out on some of those conversations that are happening. So we had to find a way to get through some of those challenges. And I think a lot at the very base of what ended up helping us, and we did a number of things, but what really ended up, if we take a lot of it and boil it a lot down, it comes back to something that we do spend a lot of time on here at Improving, and that's trust, and talking about our trust behaviors. And we have practices here at Improving around trust. We have what we call trust pods, where we get together and we talk about those behaviors and things like that. One of the things I was able to do with the enterprise architecture team was we actually started a trust pod with that group. And while that was kind of an internal effort, it was a success. And that ended up leading to a trust pod being held at the management level with the client, involving their different leadership. And I think that had some impact, and we still hear people speaking with that trust language, and thinking a little more in those ways. So we were able to, and speaking in that language, we were able to, empower the teams better overall by extending them the proper amount of trust. Right? They've got it. They're technologists. They're good at this. Right? I talked to these people. I interviewed them. We brought them on. They can do this. Right? And I trust that. I trust improvers. Right? Like I'll steal from our, I believe it was our. I don't know where David O'Hara stole it from, but I'll steal it from. I know I stole it from him. If you don't trust your people, then why are they your people? Right? And so we've got people here. I trust them. We've just got to figure out how do we, do better and make this work. So not just, empowering the team to make changes that we needed to make. Hey, speak up. This isn't working right. How can we make this work? making sure that they can communicate directly. There were some things set up where people were kind of indirectly communicating, and that just didn't make it slow. It was also playing a game of telephone, and the messages wasn't getting across. And there was no reason for that. It was a false barrier, right? There was no reason for that to happen. So I know, especially more when I got rolled into the more app dev director type role, uh, if nothing else, just out of a lot of time, I started telling people come to a question, oh, well, go ask this person directly. Expect them, and I would tell them, expect this person to reach out from our nearshore team to reach out to you. And the reaction was great. We saw those relationships go up. We saw trust happen. People were calling people by name, which in my section was a huge win, right? We had a team that had kind of been treated as disconnected, and maybe everyone didn't still know everyone's names. And now we've got people, calling people by name, people getting put on meetings from our side as the expert in an area, and then me finding out later, and I'm like, oh, that's great. I'm glad y'all invited them and not me, because they are the expert. I'm just the troublemaker, right? So, it's those kinds of things started happening. We started seeing, the traction go up. Also, another thing to keep in mind when you're building, if we tie this back to our modern teams, is empowering the team to work outside of their typical skill set. This is going to pay you back over and over. And we saw this with a lot of our nearshore group, and being very excited to do this. We had a lot of people that were maybe brought on as a front end expert or as a back end type of API.NET expert. But we've had so many now that said, getting into that team mindset, getting into that team focus. Maybe there's not a lot of front end work right now. Maybe there's not a lot of API work with these stories. But hey, I'm here. I can do this. How do I get involved with working on that? How do and sure, is some of that going to be maybe a little slower, have some bumps? Yes, but that's going to pay back so much as we work through farther into the project, right? That if people level up, skill up, they get better knowledge across the team, that team becomes more cross-functional and becomes more resilient, so that if we have anyone that's maybe out, holiday, sickness, they decide they have to go somewhere else and move on with life, different paths in their life, our
Mhm.
team still holds up, right? If those are the kinds of things that we want, happening with our teams. And so I think that was a lot of the way we overcame these challenges. Wasn't technical skills for the most part. It was about the human connection and the human condition, and building those relationships and building that trust. Roberto, did you have anything else you'd like to add?
Well, as you mentioned, it is an interesting thing related to the flexibility in each member, because we if we don't have too much knowledge about the API, for example, we can go to that site and review a couple of things. For sure, maybe it is not a faster solution, but yeah, eventually, as you mentioned, maybe another team member has on vacation or maybe on PTO or something. And yeah, the really cool thing is that they create a good ecosystem and understand all the areas. And yeah, eventually the as you mentioned, the level is is increased. So yeah.
And then I know, Roberto, you were a big component of, making sure the team was heard along the way and making sure the team had a voice. And that was great. I saw a lot of people get more comfortable with that themselves too. So do you have some things to add around that idea, and maybe some things from your perspective on that?
Yeah, sure. This is an important thing because, as you mentioned, giving the team voice is not only the provide a couple of ideas, is provide and execute those ideas eventually a better quality instead of quantity. Yeah, we need to deliver very well each part of the application, because at the end is very helpful to all the team understand, and also the manage of the application. The maintenance is really good, because if the bases are good, the maintenance of the application is really good too. So yeah.
Yeah. And so, one thing that came to mind here for me was back to, was talking about our modernizing our teams and making sure that our teams are connecting across all the differences. One thing that I think about here was, for me, there was another, cultural aspect too. working in a lot of American corporate companies, people typically have no problem calling you out or arguing with you on something. But what I found was is that the people of Mexico are so polite, and
Mhm.
even if they know you're wrong in that sort of professional business setting, sometimes they're not as willing to call you out. And so that's part of building that relationship too. And I notice now, I feel like there's a lot of the teams and a lot of the people that, we've all gotten comfortable enough now that they're, you're one of those and a few others, right? We could name that are more than willing to call me out and say, hey, you don't know what you're talking about. And some days I don't. And so that's good. That's what we need, right? We need some back pressure and for the team to be safe and comfortable in, because, a lot of the team, especially the very hands-on, very deep in it day to day are going to be your experts on it. So they need to be the ones that are, feeling safe to point that out if something's not going the way it should. And so yeah, that was another thing that came to mind for me as well. So I know you had some thoughts about delivery, and you already mentioned a little bit about delivery and delivering quality over quantity. You
Oh,
have some,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, this delivery includes planning, building, testing, releasing to the product, to the final environment. So, yeah, this is an important part. I mentioned before quality instead of quantity because I prefer quality. Takes a little bit time to review the details. I think for my side, the details are super important because this is the difference between one person and another. The details on each process, or in a simple, you can say a simple button, we need to review all the details about this button, and yeah, the process of that is really excited for me. So yeah, for
Yeah.
example, I have one rule that is tell me about something 5 times why. For
Mm.
example, why happened this? And then the answer, why happened this? And then why happened this? Because it is not only related to the code or development thing, it is related to the basis of the understand what is the process or what we need to understand before to start working on something else. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that goes to, in fact, there's a conversation I just had earlier this morning with I'm here at the improving office, another improver. And I think what you mentioned kind of goes towards that is, yeah, it's when we're working these things and people are looking at what work people are doing, it's not just about code. It's very little of it's about that. It's about that
Mhm.
design, that review, making sure we're providing the value. And so time spent on the code is not necessarily, right? There's other time we have to spend, right? It's not just on that. And we have to, make sure that everyone understands that and understands that the value happens often not when the code's actually being typed, right? So, and kind of wrapping it up and getting towards the end here, I don't think there's anything that's been particularly, earth shattering today as far as what we've talked about modern applications or more into leaning into how we build teams around that. But I just think it's very important that we're aware of our teams, we're aware of who's on the team, that we take the time to design and review and build our teams as much as we do the code and the applications and the platforms and not leave the human side out of it. And make sure we're taking care of those relationships, making sure we're building that trust. We're not going to achieve that excellence otherwise. It's just not going to happen. Roberto, did you have some other thoughts there and wrapping things up?
Well, as you mentioned, trust is really important here because we build day by day with correct communication and also with the delivery. So yeah, and also with the quality of the product because in one big team it is not complicated, but it is a funny thing to manage all the things together to create the final product at the final user.
Yeah, absolutely. And and Roberto, I know we had a couple of more what's next and a thank you slide, but somehow I've managed to load the wrong one. This is the last slide I have. So if you'd like to add some more thoughts, please do.
Yeah, so well, one of the last slides is well, the future is now. So right now we need to continue improve the all the process. Everything in this industry change quickly. So we need to use right now, for example, the AI tools like ChatGPT, Copilot, and all of that tools that we can increase the velocity, for example, of the team. We need to take in consideration a couple of things related to the small details on that implementation using those tools. Because you mentioned before, the client needs interaction face to face like this. We need a better communication because if not, we maybe the client can use ChatGPT and that's it, but this is not the real thing or the real life. This is a common tools in the industry that we can use. For example, I am new on that tools in ChatGPT, for example, and I'm using for a different configuration. For example, is my personal DevOps guy, ChatGPT, to create a couple of things in the
Hmm.
DevOps side. But yeah, and also continue with the trust related to the client. And finally, the quality of the product to deliver on time and deliver the better solution with quality. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Well, I think that kind of wraps us up. We're available for questions. Lynn, do we have any questions out there?
Yeah, we do have a couple. First of all, great talk. I'm still thinking about that ceviche. So,
Yeah.
Roberto, we're going to hold you to that when we come down to Mexico. But, seriously, nearshore, offshore, all of these great options that we have to build teams are not new. But I think what the two of you brought forward is making it feel like a cohesive group and everybody is empowered to be a part of that project. That's fairly new, especially from a viewpoint that we have in the States, like, well, we have a team and then we have nearshore. And so kudos to you guys for, bringing the message forward that a well understood project leads to a well built project. And that's across the entire team. Nick, you were saying we want to go out and find the best talent that we need. And I know that in Guadalajara, there's like 60 universities and higher education centers. When I went down there to see the office, I was so amazed at what the opportunities are down there. So it's very, very eye-opening. So let me ask you just, when you started working with empowering nearshore, because there might be people from the nearshore team, they're like, I'm used to coming into a project just doing the thing that I'm told to do, right? How do you start crossing over those nearshore engineers to let them take ownership and engage directly with stakeholders?
Once I think that my first hurdle was just finally having a realization that I think it seems like not a way that a lot of people have worked with these groups in the past.
Mhm.
And again, we had a mixture of people who had already been with iTexico and then people we were hiring in. But of the people that I kind of, as I started talking to team members and getting a feel for everyone, a lot of people had already worked with U.S. companies, and it felt like they had kind of been, in a lot of ways, treated as that kind of what I call a body shop, a kind of throw it over the wall and do something and it
Yes.
comes back and not really plugged in. And I have a different expectation because I've been an improver at improving for a long time. And we're always very involved and have, very close in collaboration with directly with the clients and directly with all the stakeholders. And so realizing that that they were willing and capable, all they really needed was the okay and the safe place to do that. Like, yes, you can go talk to that person yourself. I don't want this to get lost in between. Let's go talk to them together, or let's just go directly, or go reach out to this person. Find out, just go have that direct collaboration. And it was really just that giving permission they didn't need, but they didn't know they had. Right, right,
Yeah.
like right, kind of thing, right. And so that was really it, because like, again, I feel like we've learned how to go out and find great people,
Mhm.
and we knew we had done that. So it's like the people is not the problem. What's going right? So it was just really about, no, this is okay. This is how we work. You're not expected just to sit over there and quietly deal with whatever ridiculous things we throw at you. No, come back and let us know it's crazy, and tell us that you know a better way. We need to hear that, right?
Right.
Um,
Yeah, definitely. Totally agree with that. And Roberto, you were talking about using the five whys, which as
Oh
an
yeah.
Agilist, I use the five whys, like why? Almost sounding like I have a 4-year-old granddaughter and she uses the five whys all the time. But what other kind of responsible team behavior did you take into practice to help people grow and become part of that partnership?
Oh yeah. Well, this is a really cool question because on my side, the communication and also the contact, the human contact with the team, it is really important
Hmm.
because it is not only to develop and write all the code, everything, and it is super important to create a single communication with each team member, knows a little bit about each team member. So it is a really cool thing. Understand the feeling, also the feeling the each team member to determine the feeling to the all team. So yeah, it is a really cool thing.
Yeah.
The interaction face to face, for example, in Guadalajara office, we are around 4 or 5 members on that area, and it is a really cool thing. The interaction face to face in the office, and
Mhm.
also for sure face to face in by remote.
That's awesome. And I loved what you said about give them a voice. That really stuck with me is that, we all want to be heard and we bring all these talents together and we want to make sure that nobody's sitting in the back and just, not feeling like they have a voice in it. So great message, guys.
Mhm.
Super appreciate the talk today, Nick and Roberto. Thank you so much. And thank you to our audience today. We hope you'll come back next week. There's a link in the chat about the next talk next week. So sign up and join us again. Thank you, guys.